call the meeting to order at 7:02. We've got some consent agenda items. It contains the minutes from the August 2nd board meeting and the August 9th special board meeting. It also contains the financial transactions for the month of August and the 4 professional, 1 co-curricular, and 1 leave of absence request staffing recommendations. Let me see here. Do we want to pull the leave of absence request out of the consent agenda items and discuss? Or has everyone had a chance to take a look at that? Okay. The minutes of the August 2nd meeting, August 9th meeting, we have some professional staffing recommendations and co-curricular staffing recommendations. I would accept a motion to approve those recommendations.
I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
I will second that.
Kate and Bruce, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries 5-0. We've got a leave of absence request that we need to talk about here.
That was part of.
That was part of consent agenda, I'm sorry. Yep, we're through with that then. And then we've got some personnel items not necessary for vote, and that will move us to public comments. I believe we have one on board here that will be read at this evening's meeting. Angie, have you got anything else?
We have one written submission, and then if you would like me to submit the offer for people to
Correct.
register. All right. At this time, if you would like to make a public appearance through video by speaking to the board, please utilize the Q&A portion found at the bottom of your Zoom window. In that Q&A form, we would ask that you type your name, your address, subject of interest, and whether you have discussed the item prior to the meeting with either a district administrator or President Howery. After submitting that information, that would be the opportunity for you to transfer over to speak to the board through the video feed. And if you'd like to read the written comment now?
Yes, please. Christine has volunteered to read our public comment for this evening.
All right, this comes to us from John Gozer of 6413 Exchange Street. Superintendent Anderson and McFarland School Board, good day and thanks again for your time in reading our thoughts and comments. The point of our comments today centers upon the lack of accountability, transparency, science, and logic being applied in decision-making, and lack of parents being afforded a say or choice with what's best for their children. In particular, the missing accountability in responses to numerous questions that Katie, I, and others associated with the McFarland Parent Group have posed over the past 2 weeks has brought our family to a break point. We've attempted to engage in meaningful discussions, having posed questions such as these repeatedly. How are severity metrics such as hospitalizations or deaths considered in crafting COVID-19 related mandates and protocols? Will children en masse be required to quarantine if exposed to COVID-19? What metrics will signal an end to overreaching COVID-19 mandates? These questions and our group efforts appear to be falling upon deaf ears. While we and many other families look for opportunities to move forward with our kids' and students' best interests in mind, our district and leadership appears to be only willing to engage in discussion regarding moving backwards. Case in point, while ignoring our questions about what metrics will signal an end to the McFarland School District COVID-19 related mandates and protocols, The board will apparently discuss what metrics will signal a move backwards and into hybrid learning tonight, according to Dr. Sin's email to our district last week. To reiterate, our family and many others in the community are interested in discussion relating to how we move our students and children forward, not backward. Over the past year and a half, our children and students were asked to drastically change how they learn, interact, socialize, and develop. Their normal has been anything but in McFarland Public Schools. Katie and I desire for our children to return to normal as soon as possible, but your recommendations and actions do not seem to share our family's aim. As of today, we are pulling our children out of McFarland Public Schools and following in the footsteps of other families in the community by enrolling our children in private school for the foreseeable future. In our opinion, the missing transparency, accountability, and lacking engagement with concerned parents and community stakeholders has brought us to this break point. It's our hope that McFarland Public Schools return to normal sooner than later. However, we're no longer willing to wait for that day, especially as we recognize a school less than 10 miles away will afford our children a normal schooling experience, while our district leadership aren't even willing to answer our substantial and well-intended questions. We'll remain active within our community and parent group. We'll continue to volunteer our time as we share the group's desire for transparency, accountability, and choices within our public schools. We're also equally motivated by the many students who do not have the resources and options our children do in returning to normal. Who is advocating for these students? In closing, we hope the board and leadership better engage the concerned parents in our community and truly put our children's best interests forward rather than fall in line with a group train of thought. Our children's future depends upon objective and free-thinking leadership. Sincerely, John and Katie Gozer.
All right, thank you very much, Christine. Was there anything else, Angie?
No one has registered to speak tonight.
Okay, moving on, we have the district administrator's report.
Well, I'm going to let Lauren go with the seclusion and restraint report first, and then I'll follow up.
Perfect.
That sounds
Thank
fine to
you.
me.
All right, so you received our annual report of seclusion and restraint in your board packet. This report has gotten a little bit longer over the last 2 years because there are different requirements that went into place in 2019. So the first few pages are definitions and expectations of the district. So thinking about physical restraint, that is the restriction of a student's body movements in specific parts. We currently use nonviolent crisis intervention as our restraint procedures. Staff are trained typically, and most of the time, only staff who have been trained in NVCI are allowed to physically restrain a student unless there is an emergency situation where, say, a staff who wasn't trained is alone with a student who is so unsafe that they have to physically intervene, and then they're calling for help. So seclusion is the other term in this report, and that is the involuntary confinement of a student away from their peers, and there's different restrictions on where a student could be secluded. So we can't seclude a student in a classroom that would lock. There are specific rooms within each of our buildings that are seclusion rooms that do not have any other materials in there, so in order to keep that child safe. All right, on the very last page of the report is the number of incidences by building. One thing to note as I go through the number of incidences is we have under 5 students that are placed in alternative schools. So students whose disability really precludes them from being in our school buildings due to the unsafe behavior that they demonstrate throughout their day. They may have been here and then they have been placed in an alternative school. Those students are still our students, so they're still McFarland students. They attend elsewhere. Their incidences of seclusion and restraint still need to be documented in this report. So, for example, if you see a student at Indian Mountain Middle School, there are 27 incidences. Those may not all be for students who are at Indian Mountain Middle School physically in their building. It may be a student who would be placed at Indian Mountain Middle School but is currently attending a different school that the district is paying for because we can't we couldn't meet their needs here. Does that part make sense?
Does that happen often, Lauren?
I would say we typically have 1 to 3 students per year that are placed in an alternative school. And I would say due to behavior. We have a number of high school students that we may send to different alternative schools for graduation and credit and a different experience, and not necessarily for disability related.
And that's through the district?
Yes.
3 about, on average?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Lauren, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt again,
Yeah.
but, you didn't mention that last year, is there a reason why you're mentioning it this year?
We didn't, so the law changed
Okay.
from last year to this year, and we did not have any incidences at alternative sites last year. So it just wasn't a note to make last year. There were quite a few this year that we had to report on. And part of the reason to mention it is our buildings, most of our buildings did not go to in-person until February of last year. So to see, the middle school being at 27 incidences of physical restraint would seem high, where they're only attending partial days and starting in February. Like that number, which is why I mentioned it. And it will be going forward. It will all depend on how many kids are attending alternative schools.
So that's so interesting, because I would assume that the law and why we do the reporting is, I mean, I think transparency is a good word, to know what's happening. What kind of relationship do you have with those other schools when that happens? I mean,
So I will say, if an IEP team has determined that a student should be placed in an alternative school, that's a pretty heavy label and topic to go over. Most of those families and us as a school district and the alternative school have frequent communication. It is probably weekly communication, and when incidents occur, we know within 24 hours.
yeah.
And depending on the number of incidents, the type of incident, who is involved, the IEP team may meet, we may discuss. It really is case by case and student by student. But I would say our kids at alternative schools, the district is highly involved in what is going on. We don't want to miss kids, and we also don't want to place kids in alternative sites and say, all right, goodbye, you're no longer part of our district. We really want them to come back here. That is not a decision any team makes lightly.
And it's not very typical to have an alternative school in which you can place students younger than high school age. It is not uncommon when a student gets to high school, then on numerous factors, there may be an alternate school setting that they go to. And it's not necessarily for behavioral reasons, but younger than high school, it's quite unusual to even have a facility that is available.
Now, if we send one of our kids to an alternative school and the same issues arise there as happened, here beforehand, how does the process go from there? I mean, are we obligated to bring that student back to our district?
So typically in the alternative schools, so for example, Common Threads is a school I would assume most of you are pretty familiar with. They were a school within our district. Their specialty is students with autism and students with pretty significant behaviors. So their level of training is different and their environment is different. So a lot of our alternative schools that we send students to are really highly trained to help teach and coach students through some of those behaviors. So I would say it is rare that a student would be asked to leave an alternative school when showing those behaviors. They really work to teach through what that may look like and then have different capabilities. A lot of their times, the classrooms are 5 to 10 students. It's just a smaller scale, and a school that is probably the size of our district office. They are not large buildings. They typically have 20 kids within that whole site and really can focus on what each of those children need.
Have you ever had an instance where you felt like you weren't comfortable where the student was placed? And is that an option for us as a district to change that? I mean, that would be up to your
Yes.
professional.
Yes.
Right.
So, in IEP teams, the LEA of that IEP team, so the local education agency, it's really the person who is the deciding factor when there isn't consensus amongst a team would make that decision. And I will say, with our kids that we place in alternative sites, I attend all of those IEP meetings. So I know where all of our kids are and what their needs are. And really with our families that we're talking about alternative school placement, they are well-versed in what their child may need and are open to making sure that they have access to school. So I would say most of the time it's a conversation. It has happened that we really want to make sure that that alternative school placement is the right fit and that they can progress enough to come back to us, which is our ultimate goal, is that they can come back to our district. All right. I am happy to go through the numbers. I'm assuming you may see it in front of you, but it's just broken down by the number of incidences of seclusion by building, total number of students. It breaks it down then by number of students with disabilities who are involved in the incident, and then the same through physical restraint. And at the very bottom, you will see our total number of seclusion and restraint. So at Conrad Alvium, K2, there were 0. At Wabisa, there were 6 incidences combined. Indian Mound Middle School, 27, and the high school, 4. And I believe the second sheet was sent to you. This is not a requirement, the chart over time. It goes back to the 2014-15 school year, our district and building totals, and then including the 2021 school year. So you can kind of see our trend over time. I also would note the 1920 and 2021 school year were unique years because we were not in school full-time, full days. I would expect to see those numbers lower than in past years. So this year should be, I would assume, a little bit more on average. Our average tends to be between 100 to 200 incidences per year, really depending on the students we have. So it's very student specific, and you will see a lot of students often have repeated incidences. So while a number may be at 100, that could account for 2 students or 3 students, and those are the students we highly focus on. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice job.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right, now we'll
Dr.
go back.
Anderson, discussion on strategic planning process.
Nope, we're not quite there yet.
We aren't, eh?
Nope, we're almost there though.
Okay,
So,
let me see.
you had on your calendars, a special meeting of the electorate next Monday at 6:30. Well, the house is no longer for sale, so we do not need to have a meeting, a special meeting of the electorate on that date. But since you all have that date free, I may have an alternative when we get to the next 2. So, if it's all right, I will just skip right down to the next ones, which are the discussion of strategic planning and then the superintendent search firms. Because they're both gonna follow basically the same process. And what I think would be appropriate is that if we could, since you're already scheduled for that night, so you already planned, you wouldn't have that Monday off, if we could have a board meeting that night to talk about these 2 areas. Because we're gonna talk about tonight, but I think that you should focus, because we're gonna have to make some decisions so we know our next steps going forward. So if you, since you have that night free, we could just put out the agenda for the same time, the same night.
Well, same time will be, it was at 6:30, now it's 7, right?
We can put it at 7, that would be fine with me too.
And I think that's,
Okay,
that's
let's
from the
do
board.
that.
Yep, and to talk about just these 2 items. So, but to go on for where we're at tonight, is that we received 3 strategic planning proposals. So, and I think you got a copy of each. One was from CISA 2, which you had heard Ron Dayton come and present. Then you received one from WASB, which is the School Board Association, and one from HYA Hazard Young and Associates. Now, if you take a look at these, you're gonna find that there's a variance in price. So it's not inexpensive. So basically, looking at it, I think the very minimum that you would spend would be $5,000. And the one, I don't think it would be that low because there's expenses added. And you're gonna go as high as somewhere between $25,000 to $35,000 with HYA, because their initial was $24,500. So there's a wide range of price. It's a wide range of what you would end up getting for services for these. So I went through all of them. And what you'd find is it depends on how much time, there are some similarities, how much time they spend with people. I am a huge proponent of getting as much input as possible. Depending on which of these strategic plans you look at, a lot of them will deal with the board, or they'll deal with what they would call the strategic planning committee, which might be made up of some board members, some administrators, some staff, some community members. And how many meetings you would attend. Lots of them get some of their input from staff surveys. The way that I see the most effective process, and first, as I mentioned in my McFarland minutes, I can lead you through either of these next two. I could lead you through both of them. I could lead you through the strategic planning, I could lead you through the superintendent search, and they wouldn't cost you anything because you're already paying a salary, so I can do that for you. They are both huge time commitments. Each of these, if you look at the firms, they would go 3 to 6 months. So when you figure that the average school year is 9 months, so we're getting into, at least probably, if you start in September, which is coming up in a little over a week, you could finish anywhere between probably November, December at the earliest, to maybe February. If it's going to be successful, I think you need to put the time in necessary to make sure that it's worthwhile. In strategic planning, the first step is for, I think, you to meet as a board to decide. When you think of the district in its next 5 years, where do you think it should be? What do you think should be some of the, what I will call the pillars of a plan, the major things that you would like to work on? And once you have that, then you build out from there by getting more and more information. I am a good one for believing to have as many face-to-face meetings as feasible. Not that you wouldn't want to put forward a survey, but I believe that if people get a chance to directly talk to you, you'll get a better idea because you can ask clarifying questions and they can ask clarifying questions. And then you put all that information together into basically in this strategic plan that maybe has 3 or 4 major goals, and then each one would have several little goals underneath it, so it would tell you exactly, what do you mean by that? Because the greatest hazard that I've seen in the past is when people use terms, but they have different definitions for the terms. But the first thing you need to decide with both this and with the search proposal is, do you want to have an outside consultant help you? And if you do, then you may want to listen to some of the consultants first, so you can hear what they have to say. So you can then ask them questions so they can clarify some of your questions for you, and then you can make a determination. But both of them are going to, as I said, both will take probably 3 to 6 months. Both of them are going to have varying price ranges. They're both going to have costs associated with them. Both are going to have different levels of what I will call interaction. Lots of times they like to interact with the board, but they may interact, as much interaction they have outside of that will depend a little bit on the cost of the proposals. So first, let's go into strategic planning. On those proposals that you looked at, is there any questions that you might have? Christine?
Can you give us an idea of how much budget we have for the both of the processes?
Since Jeff isn't here, I couldn't answer that, but I could tell you that my guess is that if you decided to go with one or both, we'd be able to take a look at dollars you probably do have and rearrange funds to support it. So I don't think that dollars are gonna be the limiting factor on your budget.
Okay.
So I think if you decided to go with the most expensive one for both, I'm certain that we would be able to fund those. We just may have to look at some other things that we had in the budget that we may not purchase. But I couldn't give you that exactly without talking to it. But I wouldn't let cost be the determining factor to determine whether or not you want to go or not. Because I would rather you pay more and get a product that you like than to pay less and be unhappy with your product. Because there is a time investment. And you have to look at the time that you're going to invest in both of these is going to be substantial. And you can't get out of that, because if you don't invest the time, the product you're gonna get is not what you're gonna want, and these are some major discussions for the district.
And those are gonna be difficult questions, and the difficulty is gonna be compounded dependent upon what happens when school starts. The actual start of school, the masking and, the protocols. We don't know going into the school year the kind of effort and time that is gonna be necessary, just to get the kids back into school and into a routine of some sort. And I fear biting off more than we can chew and not getting a satisfactory finished project in either direction. We have to budget our time and resources, and it's just difficult to do that until school actually starts, I think.
Now, the one benefit that you do have is that there is overlap in both of these. In other words, finding a superintendent is going to require you to do a lot of the same things you're going to do up front that you do with strategic planning. You're going to want to meet with people and ask their opinions. So you can, at the same meeting, you can ask the opinions of the group that you're in front of, what qualities would you like to see in the next superintendent? At the same meeting, you can also ask people, as we're looking over the next 5 years for our strategic plan. So you don't have to have two separate meetings, you can ask both those at the same meeting. So, so there is an overlap for some of the time. You don't have any option really with the superintendent search.
This is true.
You're going to have somebody here on July 1st. And like I said, I can help you through that process. I've helped other districts through that process. But in the end, you are going to have to select someone. That is not something you could delegate. It's not something I think you'd want to delegate. So that one is a must.
Right.
And that one's like I laid out at the last meeting, the timeline is that, though it seems early to be talking about it now, if you want to have the individual on board in a contract by February, you start the process now. Strategic planning, I think, is important to also do because the person that you hire, you will want to have that person lead you in the strategic plan rather than having that person come in and tell you what they think you should do. Now, I think Christine mentioned it in one of our conversations is that, will we have the strategic plan done in time to have, at the same time as you hire the superintendent? And the answer is, it would be difficult. Not impossible, but that would require lots of time up front in order to have those done at the same time period.
But wouldn't you have a sense where we're headed? And I think that's important we may not have the final process, the actual goals of the district, but you'd say, we're looking at moving in this direction. And I think that would make it, again, that would at least make it clear to that individual, this is where they think they want to go.
Well, I believe that after, first you've met as a board to discuss your thoughts and ideas. And then you've met with the administrative staff and then the district-wide staff, when you've had those meetings, I think you'll have a pretty good idea of what the thoughts are. You may not have all of the goals, but I think you'll have you'll know the areas in which you're going to want to go forward. I think when you meet with the community, the parents in the community, I think they will reinforce ideas more than give you different ideas. I think that the ideas will be generated. What you're gonna find is which ones have the most reinforcement. And you can finalize it, once you know what the basic goals, we can finalize the product later on, even after a superintendent's hired. And that person will be grateful that you have already put in the time for a roadmap of what, and you'll know the qualities that you're looking for at that time. So it's not that these are incompatible, they're not, but they do take time. As I've been trying to think about the best way to get staff, to ask all of you to give up the time to meet with every building would be difficult. But what is possible, and that's for both these areas, because they both have a lot of the same process, is that we could schedule meetings with each of the buildings in which a representative from the board could go with me to listen, ask the same questions, and put all those together. So even though all 5 of you may not be at each one of the meetings, we could break them up so that you all, heard parts of it, and we put it all together into a composite report. If we do, when we do with parents and communities, that would probably be a night, and we could even, take a board meeting and structure that board meeting night, to be a night in which you have dialogue with the public on these topics. So there are ways to do it.
A question I have is just, how does your role change? Whether you are, we have an outside firm doing this, or you're leading it. How does your role change? And also, how do you interact, would you interact differently with us?
Well, I wouldn't act differently with you. Since I have led the past 2 districts in the search process, I'm pretty intimately involved. Both of the boards wanted that to occur. So I would walk you through the job description, I'd walk through the meetings to make sure we found out what the administrative staff and the other staff members were looking like, what parents and community members had. So that process, and then I would sit to gel that into a description, which I'd send out to you to say, does this accurately reflect all the things that we've heard? We then modify the job description. I know how to do the postings, so I would do the postings for you. The applicants would come in, we would schedule a meeting to sit down to review all the applicants. I'd give them all to you, so you'd have, plenty of time to read them all in advance, answer your questions, give you, there's a fair possibility that I'm going to know applicants that apply, and I would give you my thoughts on that. We would then figure out which ones you felt were worthy of a first round of interviews. We would work prior to that to select who would be, who would want to be on the interview committee, because what my belief is on what superintendent search is that once you as a board selected the applicants to be interviewed, that you thought on paper looked like applicants that you would feel be worthy to be interviewed, then we would have them interviewed by, I'd say 2 committees, staff members, community members. Then we get together to a smaller number, bring it to the board. The board will then take that smaller number, interview them, and make a decision. Christine?
So I guess I'm a little confused. And I must have misheard you, but did you say that we needed a firm for the search?
No, I'm saying that we have proposals for both to do the strategic planning, and
Right.
we have proposals for us to do the search.
So I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. So we don't have to hire a firm for either, is what I'm hearing you say?
That's correct. I
Okay.
could lead you through both
Okay.
processes.
Can I ask then another question? So I am concerned about you doing either process because of what you'd said earlier. I really feel like we don't know what this year is going to bring, that there is a lot on the plate for dealing with COVID, and let's just hope we are moving forward. But I did have a thought about the proposals with, and I was impressed by the HYA group because they're putting in proposals for both. When you read the questions that they're asking, they're basically the same thing.
Yep.
So if we're going to be sitting in a room, we either are going to be doing it twice for two different groups, or we're going to be sitting in the same room and having two different groups there and charging us an hourly fee for both of them. So I actually would love to hear from this group and see if they could modify, because they're doing a survey for both. Why not do a survey and embed questions for both? And how could they modify the budget to do
A 2-for-1.
the 2-for-1? Because it's, I mean, as someone who collects data all the time, to do double and to get data from the same people multiple times during the same year is going to be really challenging. Our survey rates are going to be lower and so on. So that was one of my thoughts was, and I was really impressed by them generally. So
And
I'd like to hear them.
There's
At least for
nothing
the
that keeps us
people-
from bringing them in.
Yeah.
At least for the people that do the superintendent search for HYA,
Mhm.
I know both those individuals very well.
Yeah.
So they're very good individuals. So if you'd like, I could contact them tomorrow to see if they could come on Monday, a week from tonight, and you could use a meeting to,
Well, before we do that, maybe, I mean, that would assume that we're going to go with them, and it might assume that they might want to work together and plan how they might pull together a proposal for both. Because
I'm not sure they would assume that we're gonna go with them if we
well,
bring them in.
but I don't want to hear about them separately. If I want to hear about them together.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
The
So
two
before
different
we-
processes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
before we jump to, like, what do all of you think about this before we jump to anything? I want to hear more before we make a decision.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. I think it'd be great to have one firm that could represent kind of both of the things that we're trying to do. I mean, obviously, I think about cost too, and that would be a big player in this. And if cost was extremely high, if I had to pick which one, because I agree with you, I don't want Dr. Anderson doing all of it. I think I would feel more comfortable with you helping with the superintendent search and having someone else lead the strategic planning, only because that's gonna take up so much of your time, and you've just done that process a few times recently, and so hopefully that wouldn't be quite as difficult. But I am completely open to hearing from HYA, just to see what they could propose, if there's a possibility that they could kind of do a 2-for-1. So I agree with you. I wasn't overly impressed with the presentation from CISA too, so I don't know that I would really be looking to hear from them again.
Many times, you know, you find when you do dig into the proposals a little bit and, you know, what they're gonna include in their work, you can see that there's a reason that one is significantly more expensive than the other. That doesn't necessarily always mean that, you know, the quality of the work is any better than the others, but I do see a great appeal in having one organization in here to do, potentially to help us out with both processes.
now, I can contact them. My belief is what they will tell you. But this is only my belief, is that they will say they would be more than happy to help you with both those, and there may be times that they will overlap. But that because your end products have a fair amount of difference, that it's still going to be two processes, and there's still, because your strategic plan, one of its pillars might be finding a new superintendent, but you're going to have other pillars. So my guess is they're going to say, yes, we can help you with both, but you have to realize is that it's, you know,
They're gonna break them out as separate,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, and there may be some overlap, but, you know, there are two separate projects.
Yeah.
I'm just impressed with a whole bunch of ideas. Kate, I tend to have the opposite feeling. I tend to think the strategic plan is the horse pulling the cart. Because in some ways, I think that's what's gonna shape who we want as our next superintendent. Craig, your point is so well put, and Dr. Privenel, you're saying the same thing. And I guess this is a terrible thing when you retire. You're saying, well, what is everyone worried about time? So obviously,
Kids,
for you
work.
guys who are in the real world, that is a major concern if you have family as well. It kind of leads me to a question I was going to ask really you guys, the veterans, because I know Dr. Privenel mentioned it in an email. How was the process done
Yeah.
for the last superintendent? And I'm going to throw a little caveat in there, and that is, there's something about, again, the acronym HYA, the fact that it's so nationwide, kind of bothers me a little bit. There's something I like about the fact that, you know, one of them has, like, the superintendent was at Verona for a number of years and kind of knows this community a little bit more. And so if you guys could relate a little bit how we did the last search, was it a nationwide firm that kind of just went all over and came up with it, or
I think
was
it was
much more
WASB.
local?
I think we used WASB. And I had no problems with them. I've been in,
Yeah,
well, and then when I first got on, I can't remember who the firm was when we got Ken Bradingham. That was a large group, staff and public and all on that one. And all the way through 26 people, I think it was. But WASB, I didn't think did a bad job. I actually was pleased with them. And I don't know what, you know, your experiences with WASB was. You could help us with that too. I just seen out of my eyes. WASB still does that, I imagine.
Oh, yes, they haven't sent a proposal to us yet, but they plan on sending.
They will.
a proposal.
Oh, well, that might be the
And that will be
same,
about 10 to 15.
that might be the same idea then, just a different group, which might get at your question about local, or at least statewide knowledge of
well, I just think
things
it's something we
going
should
on.
consider.
Yeah,
don't know
no,
if
I
that-
think it's-
Yeah, I don't know.
And that's something that's really typical is mass is a real polarizing thing. Some people believe that, you know, if you want to do computer work, you go out and hire IBM. You go out and get the biggest, the baddest, the best, and you just go that way. But others, over time, have become a little bit uncomfortable with mass and feel like you don't get the personalized support that you might with a little bit smaller organization. I can't remember the exact order that we did it, but we early on decided what we wanted to do in terms of composition of the interview teams and the hiring teams.
Yeah.
And I think the breakdown that we used back then was solid. I mean, we had teachers, administrators, community members. Did we have a couple students in at one
Yes.
time?
Yes,
I
because
think
I was still teaching at that point.
Yeah, I thought we did.
Mhm.
And we were real happy with the team that was put together, and I think the process worked for us, where where did we start out with 12 or 15 or something like that candidates? Broke it down to, did we ever go to like 6 and then 2, or did we just go?
We had 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Then we went down
And then we
to,
went down to the
2.
final 2. And at that point, once we got the final 2, the board became the principal
yeah,
interviewer.
yeah,
Whereas leading up to that, really, all the members of the search team or the interview team had equal
input,
input.
yeah.
And as the process played out, it was very interesting in terms of, there were some folks that we were familiar with that were interested in the position, and then others that the search people brought to us.
What I
And-
think might be beneficial is if you took a look at, I think it's always good to have a comparison. So I think it would be wise for these to schedule a time to listen to the presentations, or you could ask questions. I think we could bring in Hazard Young and Natia. We could, I could prep them in advance that, you'd like to look at maybe an overlap so that they could send the appropriate team that might be able to answer questions from either side. You could take a look, you could have, since WASB does the same thing, you could have them come and take a look so you can hear differences. I mean, do I have my favorites? The answer is yes, and I'm trying not to.
Well, that's
That's fine.
true though, and like Kate said, I was, along with Arlen, I'll mirror what he said, we were very pleased with WASB's participation in the previous superintendent search, but in all honesty, I wasn't as impressed with their presentation
CISA too.
That was CISA too, yeah.
Yeah. So, and School Connect is the one that you mentioned, whoever said Verona.
Yeah, I just.
Dean Grell was the superintendent of Verona, he's the one who works with School Connect. The other individual, Matt Gibson, I also know Matt, so Matt's the other one who works for School Connect. So basically, all of the superintendents that work in the superintendent search firms, I know every one of them. So, but I think it would be good for you to at least hear from a couple different ones, so you could ask and then weigh decisions on that. If you'd like, I could try to get those in. I could see if at least a couple could come in next Monday. I would schedule basically half hour, so.
we haven't got a whole bunch of time. I mean, we're gonna be backed into a bit of a problem here if we intend to get somebody first part of next year, if we wanna have somebody hired by February.
So you've already heard CISA too, so we don't need to bring those, but then since both Hazard Young and Tia and WASB do both, we could have representatives for both of those. I could also try bringing somebody to School Connect, but only does the one, but that would be 3 half hours. So if you start at 7, 8:30, at least then it would give you a chance to hear, and then you could, after that, think and reflect, and we could decide, at a next meeting, what to do, if that would work.
I wasn't impressed with School Exec Connect.
Okay.
I don't know if people were that would vie for even hearing, but.
Is there anything, just real briefly, that you could?
No, I mean, I guess it was very, very vague, like, clearly, I mean, HYA has the market,
Yeah.
like you might say, and probably WASB does too, because they've been doing it for so long. They're like, this is what we're gonna do, and these are the tools we're gonna use, and these are the questions we're gonna ask, and there wasn't anything like that in there, at least in my impression. It was very short. So I wasn't like, oh, wow, I would bring them in, but that's me. But I would love to hear other people too.
Well, there's a sense that I had, and that's just, it would be nice to have a firm, I feel, that is familiar with McFarland, that knows McFarland. And right off the bat, like particularly with the superintendent, with this sense, like, I don't know if this is gonna fit. And but I don't know. I mean, you have good people, and they've done it nationwide. I mean, they probably will be able to get the feedback and the data that
Yeah.
you're gonna be successful.
Can I ask, and this isn't to you, but why is it important that people know McFarland and that it's going to be a fit?
Because of Catherine McCluskey.
Who is
Oh, boy.
the teacher?
Oh, boy, yeah.
Right.
I
Eighth
won't-
grade social studies.
But she was her last year of teaching, and I remember she looked at me. She only had one eye.
Yeah.
And she looked at me.
So you always
with
sat on
eye,
that
and
side
she
of the
said,
room.
"This is a very special place, and I want you to maintain it." And she spent the whole year trying to explain to me about really the history behind this
Yeah.
district and what it was. So in that sense, forgive me. I'm
No.
going off as someone who really kind of fell in love with
Yeah.
this district. And I do think it is, in some ways, it's unique. I mean, in some ways in particular, I feel this school is so important to this community, more so than so many other districts. They have other things going for them. McFarland, it's our schools.
I would advocate for anyone here on this board, or administration for that matter, to attend either the state or the national school board convention, and you'll see how unique McFarland is, and how differently our board interacts with our administration, and how differently our board interacts with our teachers. And you'll sit at tables with people from all around the country, and when we sit down and talk about this school district, their eyes just get big. I mean, they can't believe that we have the relationship that we do between board and teachers, that there's rarely much controversy.
Can I throw a devil's advocate into that then?
Absolutely.
Which you know I'm going to. There's no learning without cognitive dissonance. There's no learning without conflict. I mean, that's how people learn. And so my concern is, if we continue to replicate, are we replicating what's good, or are we replicating what we feel like we know? And how does that affect, I mean, we're in different millennial generations now.
We are,
So can we, so the reason why I'm bringing that up is, that was the same kind of story that I was told when I started on the board, is we're a family. And I said, well, what if this family member doesn't like to eat what the other family members don't like to eat? What happens to that family member, you know? So it feels like you have to fit in order to be here? And
No.
how does that make?
No, I would
I'm
say-
sorry,
I would
let
say-
me just finish.
Oh, good, I'm sorry.
So what I'm hearing a lot of people say is, there is this culture and tradition, and that we're not willing to change and grow. And so that's why I'm bringing up, why I asked kind of rhetorically, why is it so important that someone knows McFarland, and what value might there be, rhetorically I'm asking again, to having someone come in who's a little more objective
Yeah.
than that? I'm just throwing that out there rhetorically. You don't have to defend, because I don't want you to feel defensive. It's more
No,
like,
no.
you know, we're changing, our demographics are changing, we need to think forward.
And
I
I
will tell you, if you want to have success, I mean, the only way that you will get really lasting change, and no matter what group you talk with, there's lasting change that they want to see. In other words, whether it's to maintain the good things you have or to make things better. To do it, to make lasting change, you have to have a continuity of leadership. In other words, the person who inhabits this chair, you're gonna want to be here for at least 5 years.
Yes.
Because if it's much less than that, a person gets something going, but, you know, and to really culture it in the system takes time. If there's not, and I refer to it as a marriage, especially between the board and the individual that inhabits this chair, it won't get. And it's not that you can't have the cognitive dissonance for learning, but if there's too much dissonance so that the two teams can't work together as a cohesive body, you'll go nowhere. That doesn't mean you have to find some, that's why when people say a fit, usually it means that the basic values of the individual need to fit the values of the community. Because if the values are in conflict, the person doesn't stay, and the change doesn't happen.
I don't think what Christina's saying and what you're saying are necessarily
Yeah.
mutually exclusive
I agree.
either. I agree
Mhm.
in that you shouldn't put yourself into a corner saying that in order for this person to be right, he or she has to know our culture. And I do think it's helpful to understand the culture that's been historically in place here about the relationship between teachers and board, because it's extremely unique. I mean, you just never, you don't see basically a union and a management arm go into negotiations knowing that they're gonna work something out. It just isn't the kind of confrontational, I don't know, negotiations, I guess you could say, that it is in and was in other places. And our reaction to Act 10 was a good example of that.
But that was 10 years ago,
Oh, I
Craig.
understand.
mean, let's talk today, because.
But we got a history of it, though.
Yeah, and that
yes.
was what I was gonna say. If I
yeah.
could just answer, not, again, it's rhetorical. please, there's no bad feelings. It's just that if you look at things like what they did at Conard Elvium with Don Barnes, we were so far ahead of the curve, what we were doing. And and then we switched, and now we're doing completely different things. I would say our district, more than anything, really likes trying new things out. And I think that's part of our tradition, and I don't want to lose that. So I think if anything, that just kind of reinforces what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, I
So-
think we're saying different things. I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what was said here, but I am gonna push for the idea that looking only in Wisconsin is the best thing to do. I do feel like if we're going to broaden and think about, you know, where we're going in the future with our children, I think we need to think bigger. And I would love to have a national search, possibly, or have whatever group does it look outside of Wisconsin. So to me, having those two groups come in is a really nice balance. Like, let's hear what they have to say. I mean, I'm really open
I
to it.
don't see it could hurt anything.
Pardon? Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not gonna hurt anything, and it's
No,
not
no.
all that much time. It's the length of a regular meeting anyhow.
Yeah.
Right, so what I'll do is I will contact both firms tomorrow and see if I can arrange half-hour segments, basically for them to come in. I'll give half hour with maybe 15 minutes carryover, so if we do the two firms.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like an hour and a half to 45 minutes
Sounds good.
segments.
Mhm.
And this is something they do. You know,
Yes.
they're gonna come in with their prepared materials, and it really goes pretty well. I don't recall, Arlen, when we hired the last superintendent, was the search outside of the state, or was it strictly in the state of? I
No,
don't
they'll all
recall.
search outside, it doesn't
But-
make a difference.
but can-
WASB and all that, everybody will search outside of the state.
They do.
Both in and out, yes.
Just
Good
keep
people
in mind,
know.
though, that one of the differences in this is that we're talking about two different things. So we're doing the strategic planning process and the superintendent search, and I think you have to find a good mold,
Thank you for
essentially.
bringing me back down to earth, because I had totally forgotten about the strategic
Right.
planning part.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Good, so I will do that and I'll arrange
Okay.
that.
Can I ask one last question of you?
Sure.
I'd like you to kind of do some soul searching, since a number of board members have mentioned the fact that time is of the essence, in a sense. We gotta be careful we don't overcommit. I want you to at least think in your mind, if you would, do you really think you could do it? And if you could only do one, which of the two would you be more interested in? You don't need the answer now, you can just think about that. And I'm just kind of gonna throw that to you,
Yeah,
because you are human.
no,
And,
The,
I agree with you, Bruce.
Yeah, but anyway, that's just something you can sleep
I'll
on.
let you listen to both, and after you listen to both, then I'll be happy. I can answer your question right now, but I'll let you listen to both.
Sure.
And have your discussion, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay. And one last word, I will send out Gary Schneider's, I talked with you, I think, Craig,
Yep.
about it.
Yep.
If you've ever seen his interview with Lloyd Schneider. Have you seen it?
No.
Okay, I have it on YouTube. Gary told me about it the other day, and I looked at it, and I've been meaning to send to all the board members. It's really sort of like 10 minutes.
Lloyd Schneider is the gentleman that created our school district
Yeah.
back in the
Oh,
early.
yes, I read
early
his
60s.
sign on the
On the
Stadium.
stadium.
football field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be okay, Dr. Anderson, to also check with Jeff about budget? Like,
Yes.
I think, once again, my goal would be to get the biggest bang for our buck. Like I said, if they're gonna do a survey, and it's $2,000 to do the survey, to add a couple of questions should not add to that. We might be adding time to them doing different data collection, but you know what I mean? Like, so I guess I would want to know how much budget we're working with,
Yeah, I
to
will.
make sure that we're
Jeff
staying
is on his
within.
way back.
Oh, is that vacation? Oh, that's
I know he's
good.
on
Well,
his way
just,
back. I
you know,
talked to him
we don't
today.
need, whenever, but that's really important too.
Yeah, I think he's back on Wednesday.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
All right, so that's the plan, and I will update you what I learned from both groups, and I'm gonna contact WASB and HYA.
Okay, good. Thank you
Thank you.
very much. So that takes us to our action items. And let me find the right spot here.
Action on COVID-19 protocols for the 2021-22 school year for metrics, contact tracing, and testing on site, and co-curricular activities. I would look for a motion to approve the recommendation.
And I have actually 3 recommendations, since there's 3 different parts.
Yep.
With the one on metrics, basically, we're looking at keeping the metrics that you used last year. And looking at them, there did not appear to be a reason to change. They worked well for your district last year. There was no really discernible reason to change them. So it's basically continuation of the metrics that you had already been using.
I do have a question about the metrics. So I see, so things have changed a little bit since last year, well, in a lot of ways. One of those things, though, is that there is a fair amount of our student population that's now vaccinated, and I don't see anything in here that addresses that at all. When we're talking about positive cases and reverting back to virtual, and what do we do with those kids? Do they go to virtual? Because that doesn't really fit what we approved last week for quarantining. So I feel like we need to take into account some changes that have happened since the end of last year.
Now, one of the nice things about the metrics that you had for last year, and the reason that we recommended to keep them for this year, is that there was flexibility that was allowed in that, so it's not that it's a hard and fast number that will take you from one to the other. You can look at the situation, so the numbers are, I guess the best word is a guideline, because then you take a look at that. Under your metrics that you had last year, under the things that were happening, the metrics didn't indicate that you needed to close. So there should be less reason to close this year than there was last year because of the vaccines. So this appeared to give us, some guidelines, but flexibility.
Does that address, can you give an example, Kate?
That's what I was just.
So
gonna
I
ask
guess
you.
I'm talking about, we'll just say a 10th grader who, let's say they're in a classroom, well, no, let's say that there's multiple outbreaks within the high school that reverts, well, maybe high school is a bad example. We'll say middle school, because there's less movement in the middle school. So there's a middle schooler who's fully vaccinated, and they go between classes, and there's enough outbreaks to flip like a section of students to virtual, right? So we meet that criteria where there's 5 positive cases within 5 days, or 3 positive cases within 5 days. And when you guys look at it, you can't really see a link between those people, okay? So then, based on what I'm reading, that would be when you would decide to either flip a classroom or a grade level to virtual learning for 2 weeks. If you do that, then those children that are fully vaccinated, so that 7th or 8th grader that's fully vaccinated is then flipped to virtual for 2 weeks. My question is, do those kids, because there's going to be a number of them, need to be virtual learners, and have we addressed that? Because there's going to be parents who say, well, why is my child having to go to virtual learning when they're fully vaccinated? They may have been a close contact, but they, according to our guidelines, don't have to quarantine unless they have symptoms. So I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, that people are going to question that. So it totally makes sense in the younger grades, but we do have to think about those fully vaccinated children and the metrics we approved last week and kind of tie that into this.
But if
Any
you-
thoughts?
I have a thought, but if you have a thought, I'm happy to.
I like to both of you kind of look at.
Let's just see, so we don't talk at the same time. So I first want to point out, our reverse metrics, we don't have to have. As a school district, we do not need to have reverse metrics at all. DHS has an outbreak plan and could come in and say, there's too many cases, you have to close a building, a classroom, your entire district. Like, they have that ability regardless of vaccination status. I would say if we are seeing a number of positive cases and as the person who reviews every single positive case that comes into our district and really looking at connections, we have always been able to find a connection. It has yet to happen that we have seen so many positive cases that we have not been able to find the link. And I think that's where part of this comes from, is that if we in Dane County are seeing a few more breakthrough cases, that if we are seeing more positive cases that is really rising to the concern where we're thinking of closing a classroom, I think it will be because we are seeing more people vaccinated testing positive, especially at the grades that they are able to be vaccinated, and then there are positive cases. So I could very much see your point, Kate, like how do we factor that in? And I think the beauty of our reverse metrics is that it's not a hard and fast line, right? It's not, we have 3 cases, we're shutting down, or we have 5 cases and we're shutting down. Like, we have a team that comes together and we talk through all of those scenarios, and vaccination will be part of that conversation of what it looks like. I couldn't pull up the document because I couldn't find it fast enough, but one of the pieces on there that I think we could add would be the bullet point where it says, like, like the things that we're going to talk about as that group could be added vaccination status. Like, that could be one of them. Now, it doesn't get to your point around if we have to close the classroom and there are 5 kids, say, who are vaccinated, could they still come to school? And I think in that case, the answer is going to be no, only for the fact that our teacher, to teach the 5 kids in person, the other 20 virtually, becomes impossible. And it is one of the factors we've heard most from our teachers, that teaching simultaneously is hard. Mm-hmm. And so for those 10 days, we would ask all families to move to virtual, instead of having to hire a sub to teach one or to run them simultaneously. Feel free if you.
Does that make sense to you, Kate?
It makes sense. I don't know that
But
I
we're still
fully-
gonna get the,
You're still gonna get pushback,
from the
definitely,
parents,
from that. I
you know,
mean,
for sure.
yeah.
I would say too, and I think over the last 18 months, I have said in meetings, large and small, that hope is not a plan, and so we need plans in place. However, we never invoked these metrics last year, and if you have looked at the Dane County number of cases and the cases in the area, November of last year, there were a lot of cases in the county, and given the vaccination status of people in the county, I do feel hopeful that we wouldn't get to a situation like that again in the county. Now, we don't know, we want to make sure we have a plan just in case, but even at that point, when there were so many positive cases in the community, we never got to a point where we triggered any of these metrics. If we did get to a point where we were triggering these metrics and considering closing, I think Lauren's guess is probably pretty accurate, that it would involve breakthrough cases of vaccinated individuals. And in those cases, we would want to keep even our vaccinated students as safe as possible by having them take a pause while we gather more information, while we see what it is that's happening. I believe in the county, that we know that there's 70+% of the community vaccinated. And when you break it down by grade level, I believe the percent is equally high among even the 12 to 16, 12 to 18 population. So many of our students are going to be vaccinated in that age level. So if we get to a point where at those grades, like 7th through 12th grade, we're having this many cases in this short of a time, I think it's likely that vaccinated students would be involved in those positive cases.
Yeah, I think it's hard to compare when you're talking about November, since the majority of students weren't here. And honestly, like in the high school, they were never really fully here. So it's a whole different
It is.
ballgame this year, so we need to remember that too. There's gonna be far more students in the buildings for a much longer period of time.
And
So,
what would happen is if we get to a case like that, we're gonna have a discussion, or I'm gonna have at least a discussion with all the board members saying, look, here's where we're at. Here's what the thoughts are. Before I make this decision, I wanna
Okay.
make sure that you're all comfortable with it.
okay, I mean, I want to maintain a safe environment, definitely, but I don't want to make it so that it's like a quick decision. I think we need to talk about it definitely before we make a decision to go backwards. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Kate, for sure. And I wanted to bring up a question. It's not on here, but how is communication going to be handled? Are you going to be doing the daily email updates? Are you going to have the dashboard that shows? Because, like you said, the pushback, the community wants to know what's happening. They want to know. I have someone at the high school. I still want to know what's happening at the middle school, right? So I was just curious about that. It's not in here, and I don't know if it needs to be in here, but to me, it's very much tied together.
So we are going back to our same communication process we had last year. So our staff will receive a daily notification of case numbers. So it could be 0, it could be 1, however many positive cases there are, staff will get a daily notification. Our families will get a notification whenever there is a positive case, and that will go throughout the district. Regardless of if you have a high schooler, you will see if a CEPS student or staff has tested positive, and the dashboard will continue to be updated. We will go back to most likely daily updates of the dashboard, except for that bottom section, we only updated once a week. That was in relation to our reverse metrics to kind of track those throughout the week instead of by day. But it will be back to the same as it was in June prior to summer. Summer has been fairly slow, and so we didn't send out the daily notification, we sent them out weekly.
Okay.
Anything else? We could go to, do we want to act on these individually?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, then I think I'll move to continue using the same reverse metrics for moving from in-person instruction to virtual instruction that were approved by the Board of Education in January 2021 for the start of the 2021-2022 school year. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Bruce? Discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. And now, do you want to do this, Wayne, or do you want me to read it?
I'll do the contact.
Go ahead.
tracing.
Yep.
In other words, so the next one is contact tracing and testing. So we've met, first we had a meeting with Public Health, Madison and Dane County, and they put us in contact with Fitchburg Family Pharmacy, would be, when we applied with the Department of Health Services, they match you with a pharmacy to help you do your testing, and they matched us with the Fitchburg Family Pharmacy. We went through the types of testing that would be available to us. Those were routine testing, which would be random. Now, you have to remember when I say random, you have to have permission. In other words, if Bruce was randomly chosen, Bruce has to give permission to be tested. So you can't just select and test, you have to have the permission. Event screen, which if you're having a large event, you can have those screened in advance. Diagnostic is where we test students who feel symptoms.
Would
or
that
outbreak.
include, does that include staff as well?
Yes.
I would think, okay, it just said students, but I assume it's
Yeah.
staff too, sorry.
Or outbreak if something were to happen, also we get a large number and we don't know what the reason is. What we are recommending is that we do the diagnostic and the outbreak testing. Is that you can't do all of them, but the reason we're choosing that is that, one, the random isn't really random. And the event screening is that we could test everybody for an event, let's say we had homecoming. The trouble is that it takes 2 to 3 days to get the thing, so if we test the day before, we get the results after the event is over. And if we do it 2 or 3 days before the event happens, there can be something happens between
After.
the time we tested and the time of the event. So it didn't seem to give us the information that we're gonna need at the time of the event. The other two seem to be things that, we would, if a person's having symptoms and we have the test, that makes sense. they're probably gonna wanna get tested anyway, we're gonna recommend testing.
Yep.
If there was an outbreak, we'd wanna have testing because obviously there's something happening. So that's what we're recommending, to go with those two. It's not that if something happened, we couldn't do one of the others, we still can from the same pharmacy. But this is what we're looking at as far as like a testing protocol.
How does it work with students? I'm assuming you need to get their permission,
Yeah.
or the parents' permission, right?
Yep,
Yes, a consent form will be sent home to all families to sign, so we could keep one on file. We even have, for families who have not yet signed consent, if their child is going to be sent home sick, oftentimes we will ask them on the phone and say, we don't have a consent form on file, we're sending your child home sick, would you like to sign a consent form, and we could test them before sending them home. We did that last year just because we didn't receive all the consent forms back.
Did you feel like last year, I'm just curious, how many students participated in this last year?
I would say we were very lucky in the fact that not a lot of our kids were symptomatic at school. So we only started this towards the end of April with PCR testing. I would say we only tested 2 students from April to June. So it was
Okay.
not many.
So it is PCR testing, that was the
Yes.
other thing I was going to ask.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess, aside from they're here and it's easy to test them, so I get why we would test them if they're being sent home and the parents want that. But because you're saying it takes 2 to 3 days to get the results back, I guess what is the big benefit aside from that for like close contacts, for example, to be tested here versus just going to like their clinic or forward pharmacy and being tested and getting the results faster?
I think for some of our families, it is much more convenient to have them tested here. They may not have a healthcare provider that they can call. They may not want to take their child to forward pharmacy. I think it's just another option. It's another option for families. It is not a mandatory test that we would require. If you're more comfortable with your healthcare provider, that's great. I think what I have noticed through the entire pandemic is if we can offer more options and opportunities, that is better for our families. And so I would say that, like, there might be a time that we have encouraged people to reach out to their healthcare provider because typically you get your results a little faster. But there are times that a healthcare provider will say, we're not testing your child. Like, we're just, we won't do it. And so then they will come back to us and say, well, you're requiring a negative test, but I can't get a test. And so in this case, it provides that opportunity where, drive them here and we can test them.
Okay.
We could also, through the diagnostic testing, is you keep your child home and you call and say they're sick and say, why don't you drive them through their parking lot? We could test them. So it wouldn't just be for our kids that we are sending home due to symptoms.
Okay, and is it a nasal swab or a nasopharyngeal swab?
It is a nasal swab,
Okay,
and I believe it's self-administered.
okay.
Is that a thing?
Well, it's so, the gold standard is the really deep nasopharyngeal swab, but that's really only done in the healthcare clinics, so that's the most accurate.
Yes, if they're the same test that we used in May, our students are able to do them. It's just a quick nasal swab, or parents are able to do them, so
Yeah.
it's not necessarily even one of our health staff doing it.
Kate, with that test, is it more likely for a false positive or a false negative?
Probably a false negative. I mean, I can't answer that 100%, but likely more a false negative. I feel like I'm the only one doing talking here. I think we just
We're all
need to be
learning.
really careful. Like, I've thought about this testing thing a lot, and I don't think it's a bad idea. And I think if parents are willing and they sign an agreement, I think that's fine. But I just want us to be very careful about kind of overstepping with our decisions and how we test and who we test. And, that's why when I was reading through this, like event screening and diagnostic, I don't know that we want to go there, with false positives and false negatives and things like that. So that's.
Do you have
my
an idea
opinion.
where we might draw the line if that's the case?
I think that's up to everybody. I mean, it totally makes sense if parents want to do it, to get tests here for their children
Yeah.
who are sick. I mean, that makes a
I
lot
think
of
it's
sense.
a security blanket
Yeah.
for a lot of parents.
But I just think when we start talking about testing outside of that, which I realize they're not even suggesting, but because it was presented, I want to bring it up. I think you are starting to kind of go into this zone that I don't know that we want to go into at this point in the pandemic.
I think it's important to note too, the 4 types of testing is what DHS has laid out, right? And partially because there are a lot of smaller counties that don't have access to the testing that we do here in Dane County. So I think that also is a factor, like, this is guidance for the entire state. We have a ton of testing opportunities within Dane County, right? Like, within a mile, you could be tested at 4 different sites.
Right.
That's not the case everywhere. So I think, right, there could be this feeling of overreaching, especially here. But I think when you talk about a smaller county where they don't have that access, it may be a nice, reliable source.
That
And
makes
that's why our
sense.
recommendation isn't what we
Yeah.
consider overreaching.
Is there any other discussion? Anyone care to make the motion?
I can, I guess. I move to have both the diagnostic and outbreak testing administered within the schools of the school district for the start of the 2021 and 2022 school year.
I'll second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
All right, the last is for the co-curriculum. And what we are recommending, Jeff Finstead, Paul Ackley, and I, we're working together on these protocols. Now, I will tell you right up front, one of the difficulties for us is School District McFarland is that, at least in the Rock Valley Conference, we're the only Dane County school. And the schools outside of Dane County have a lot different recommendations than we do.
There were, schools were in 5 different counties. The Rock Valley schools are located in 5 different counties, and each county has tweaked their,
And we're the only one in Dane County, so we
That's
actually did
correct.
surveys to ask what other people are doing. Our recommendations are the most stringent of all the schools that were applying.
that's the way it was last year as well.
I'm
Yeah.
So anyway, here are our recommendations, that the school district McFarland will follow the COVID-19 protocols of the schools that we are participating against while we are at their school facilities. So if it's an away event, we're gonna follow the protocols of the home school that we go to. The second is just the opposite. When competitors and spectators from other school districts come to us, they will follow our COVID-19 protocols. So when we go to an away event, we will follow the protocols that that school district has set in place. When someone comes to our event, they will follow the protocols that we have set in place. Participants and spectators for outside co-curricular activities will not need to wear masks, because right now, we're not requiring masks to be worn at recess or for outdoor events, so we're doing that same for co-curriculars. There will not be a limit to the number of spectators, other than the limit imposed by the space capacity that are able to observe an indoor event. In other words, when the pandemic first hit and there needed to be, basically a certain amount of spacing, it reduced the number of spectators that were able. We are recommending that the only thing that basically determines the amount of spectators is the amount of space that you have, because every building area has a capacity that's set by the fire department.
So was that for just indoor competition?
Well, I think
It
even
was
your
for
outdoor.
outdoor.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
what, I
space.
viewed it as that too, okay.
Now, do I think that you're ever going to reach what your capacities are? The answer is no. But there is a capacity set for every facility by the fire department. Spectators attending inside co-curricular events will need to wear a mask. If a spectator chooses not to wear a mask, they'll be given the option of putting on a mask and staying or leaving the co-curricular event. In other words, we require everyone that comes into the building now to wear masks. If you're coming into an indoor co-curricular event, it only made sense to keep it the same as during the school day. So, you know, if a person comes in and they don't have masks, we'll have masks available for them. If they don't put one on, we will, you know, basically ask them to please put one on. If they refuse to put one on, then we'll ask them not to attend the event. The same as we do it for if something were to happen during the school day. The next is participants of inside co-curricular events will not need to wear a mask when competing. Participants who are on the bench or on deck will be required to wear a mask. And coaches will need to wear masks while coaching inside events. So if you're participating, you don't need to wear a mask, but if you're on the bench or waiting, then you would wear a mask. Next, coaches and co-curricular participants will not need to wear a mask while practicing indoors, but all practices will be closed except for members of the team. The reason that we recommended this is that when you're doing like volleyball, there's a lot of high, you know, everybody's usually practicing. It's not that you have a certain group practicing and a certain group sitting. Everybody's practicing. When the events they're playing, they're not going to be wearing a mask. Practicing, it didn't make sense. Volleyball is not really a close contact sport. In other words, it's not that you're close by one another. And it only made sense that since they're going to be participating when they're competing without a mask, that they're practicing the same, they could do that without a mask, but we're closing it so people can't from the outside come in and watch.
I think last year volleyball was considered a medium risk sport.
The next is concessions will be allowed, but they must be eaten outside of the gym or pool area. And the reason we did this is not that you haven't let concessions in your gym and pool area before, but what we did not want to do is have to make a judgment call of, I bring in a bottle of popcorn or pop, and I, you know, basically don't have my mask on, but it's just slow, you know, so it's like I take the whole time to eat a bag of popcorn. And it's like, you know, are you just trying to do that to avoid the rules? So we said, we'll have concessions, but you have to eat them outside of the gym or pool area. Next, inside co-curricular workers will need to wear masks. So if you're taking tickets or you're on crowd supervision, you're going to wear a mask. Those were the ones that we felt made sense. As I said, when we pooled basically our conference teams, we are the most stringent by far of any.
It was, I guess I wouldn't go so far as to say it was problematic. I supervised baseball games this last year, and we attempted to convince participants and spectators from the opposing schools that they should abide by the McFarland standards. And there weren't a lot, but there were issues that people, you know, brought up their constitutional rights and things like that they were just bound and determined that they weren't gonna wear a mask either way, and they had a son participating, and got a little passionate at times, but I think it's a rule that needs to be in place.
And what the schools basically have agreed is that, you know, they're gonna make these known that, you know, if you go to another school, then you need to follow their rules.
That's all they can do unless they send supervision along. What they would do in a basketball or a football situation is the visiting school would send supervision along with their spectators, so it would fall upon them to enforce our standards here. It's much more difficult when a McFarland supervisor or volunteer attempts to get the spectators from the visiting schools to comply.
We didn't have these rules all last year, right? I mean, we didn't have these protocols? Or did we?
More or less,
Yeah,
yeah.
actually,
but-
everybody was wearing masks even playing last year.
Well.
And outside.
Well, again, because of the Rock Valley,
Yeah.
that wasn't necessarily true, because I was putting on a cross-country meet this past spring, And, then I was informed that certain teams were from the Rock County or whatever, and they didn't have to wear masks. and
Right.
It was crazy. So I didn't know if they even had these
It
protocols.
can be confusing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it sounds like, I have two questions. One is, I'm not sure who you approach because we're in different divisions for different things, but what I'm hearing you say is all of our conference teams, no matter what conference we're talking about, has agreed to this and are willing to say that. I'm just curious about that.
What everyone has agreed to is that if they go, so when we surveyed all the schools, and I talked to Rock Valley, because when we're in swimming, we're in Dane County, well, then most of them are similar to us. So the Dane County schools are fairly similar.
We're
not all
in a
exactly.
different conference.
Yeah.
Our
But-
swim team's in the Badger Conference.
Right, and what about football?
Rock Valley.
That's Rock Valley.
So are we in any other conferences besides those two?
Probably not.
Okay.
I think all of those are, so like, when we're in the Badger Conference, then a lot of us have very similar rules, because most of us, not everybody, but
Yeah.
most. But what we did is basically took a survey of all of them, and everybody agreed that if you're going to the imposing school, you will follow their rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Me again.
Remember, the school district,
You don't need to
So,
apologize.
it doesn't mean that a parent won't argue it, but
So I actually, on this one, so I want to commend you guys because I think this is a very good outline. It's, it's not easy making these decisions, and I think overall this is a really good outline. One thing I thought about after I read this, last year I was at sporting events, I saw these kids trying to participate in masks, especially in like basketball and soccer and things like that, and it was very difficult. So I'm fine with them not wearing masks when they're playing. The one thing that I think is kind of ironic, I get what we're trying to do here, but we're saying you don't need to wear a mask when you're playing, which is fine. You don't need to wear a mask when you're practicing, which is fine, but go sit on the sideline and put on a mask. I don't even know what that's really doing because they've all already been together without masks on, right? So if there's somebody who has COVID, everybody's a close contact at that point. So I get what you're trying to do. I guess my question is more, is it really doing anything? Do you see what I'm saying?
Paul was asked that question many times last year.
Well,
there's folks that don't, things have to be logical for them to understand why they're the way they are, and that's not logical.
well, I mean, but my question is logical because you're not protecting yourselves from the other team, right? When you're playing in a game, because you're playing out there against them without masks on. This is really just indoor. I mean, outdoor, they're not gonna have masks on. So my question is, I'll use volleyball as an example, or like the swim team. They put these masks on when they get out of the pool or they go to the sideline, but they're with all the kids that they're with all the time without masks. So is it necessary? Is the outcome gonna change because they put masks on the sideline? I guess I'm just playing the devil's
No, that's
advocate
fine.
here.
I am wondering so last year, this was the exact guidance that came from public health. Well, you were actively playing, you could be unmasked, but anytime you were not actively playing, you had to be masked. So my guess is that is similar to where this proposed guidance is coming from. Another thing to think about, is the number of players that we have that may not play during the game, that may always just be on the bench. And then when the other players come, they join, sitting on the bench, and then re-mask, potentially never exposing the person then on the bench next to them if they've only ever sat on the bench. That could be the only time I would think, like, we may have a team manager, and feel free to correct any of my athletic conversation. This is not my area of expertise. Team managers may not engage in active play, are on the bench, would they have to be masked or not? A team member who maybe is a player but is hurt is on the bench, masked or not, because they can't engage in active play. Those would be the
So
only
those
times.
make sense. I think though, even the players that don't play practice, right? So they all practice together. I guess I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I just want to bring up, because we've gotten a lot of public comment about it. And so when I thought about it, I initially thought about it just like you. You know, it makes sense. Why wouldn't they put a mask on when they're on the sideline? But then when I started thinking through it more, I don't know that it's really preventing anything. I mean, if any of those players get exposed to COVID, let's say when they're playing actively, right?
Yeah.
They're going to expose all of that team is going to be close contacts, because by the time they find out that somebody else tested positive for COVID, you're going to have been at practice the next day. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm with you totally, Kate, except when we're in like basketball. So I don't know how many are on a team usually. I know how many play on the 5.
About 15 usually.
15, right. And probably 7 or 8 of those the whole time. So if those 7 or 8 are positive and they're masked, they're not also putting the whole 200 people around them at risk. So it's decreasing risk when we're in that situation. And I think about the younger kids who go to basketball games or volleyball games. That's what I'm thinking about. So it's just decreasing the risk that those 8,
Yes.
yeah, you're right, they may be exposed, and the other 5 who are on the floor, well,
Like the
there's
entire
5 and whatever.
team's gonna-
Yeah, and the same with volleyball, the same,
Yeah.
you know,
But
usually
then
the
the-
same ones play, a couple might rotate in, but then there's a bunch who are sitting. And then if they're masked, then that decreased that risk of those 5 to 7. So that's the only thing that I'm thinking with that, because
Yeah.
I'm kind of with you on it
I
otherwise.
mean, like for the spectators, I don't think they're at risk. They're going to be wearing masks. They're 6 feet away from all the other players. I think the team managers, the coaches, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with what you're
Yeah,
saying. I mean,
I hear
I
you.
mean,
I hear you.
I will tell you that Paul Ackley, who is listening to this, is hoping that you are persuasive and change your mind. Because
I just think that so the reality is, because we're mainly talking about high school and some middle school. Oh, you're welcome.
See, I characterized it correctly?
I think anyone should wear a mask. I mean, obviously, if they feel that that's more comfortable, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that in, any sporting event. My big question is, what are we mitigating? And personally, I feel like if you're just telling them to put it on the sideline after they're together all the time for rides, for practices, for everything that they do, it's kind of just a formality.
Well, remember, busing we are.
And
Anytime we're on the
right,
bus, they have to.
but then they go get in their cars to drive home together. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's, I look at,
Well, and I'm looking at this, Kate, I really do hear you. And sorry, Paul. But proactively and not reactively. I mean, I think it's better for us to start more conservative in our approach, and then, like we're thinking, hopefully, but you said, hope isn't a plan, that if the numbers continue to be down and we continue to be okay, then we can get rid of that
You can peel
versus,
away
okay,
layers.
everybody, we're back to mass. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
is there any benefit to saying, let's see how it goes through September, and let's see how it goes through, and then, okay, we're doing
We are gonna
okay.
look at
we're
it
gonna
every month.
readdress.
We
every
have to,
month. Yeah.
this isn't gonna be forever. Oh,
Right.
Please don't be forever. So that's the way I look at it, otherwise I'm with you, and I'm sorry, Paul, but,
Point well taken.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't deny it.
Yeah, I mean,
It seems
that would be the only
illogical.
part of this I would change. I mean, I personally don't feel like it really, I hear what you're saying, I do, and I don't want to act like I'm careless about
No,
it, because I'm
hear
absolutely
you.
not. I
Are we
mean,
solving a problem that doesn't exist?
well, we're doing it, but it's not going to change anything, because the reality is, in my opinion, it's not going to change anything, because the reality is they're together maskless more than they're not. So.
True. Yeah, I agree.
do we want to pull that one out to vote separately on that, since that appears to be the one where there is some?
No,
Okay.
because
That's
there's a part of me, I'm sorry, there's a part of me feels that they should be wearing masks. And riding with their friends, I'm hoping some of their parents are saying, wear a mask.
Yeah.
To me, I think we're I think we're much better making an error towards
Caution.
keeping people safe. I think last year, I know that kids, they didn't even have some of the sports in the fall because they had to wear masks. And, you know, we said, okay, we know now. A lot of this we just don't know. And my feeling is if you're going to err on the side of being safe.
So are you saying just on the sideline?
Yeah, I think the players, I think it's gonna happen. I do know that, yeah, they're gonna be practicing. But again, you're in an area that has a lot of air turnover. So hopefully, you're not exposing them. We know that, you know, professional sports teams or athletes are testing positively. So I think it would be just, it's the right thing to do. I'm sorry.
You don't have to be sorry.
You don't have to be sorry, it's fine if you.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean-
You know, I don't know that
Sorry, Paul.
that all of these have black and white kind of
Yeah.
answers. You know, there's a lot of gray area, and as long as we are revisiting monthly, you know, and I think we can easily decide at some point that we can remove the mask on the sideline, maybe. You know, when the cases get to a certain place, maybe a month down the road, or maybe 2 months down the road. I don't know.
Maybe when we have a vaccine for those who are under 12.
Well,
Yeah.
Well,
we've
but we're
already agreed
talking
that we're gonna
about-
look at it every month,
Right.
Yeah.
at a minimum.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about kids that are over 12 because 7th and 8th graders are
Right.
over 12.
But we're looking at their siblings too,
Yeah.
though. That's the thing. And I
That's
think-
fine, I mean, we
Mhm.
can vote.
Okay.
Unless, Arlen, do you have anything?
I think they should, I have no problem with the mask. I understand a lot of people do. I think it's a benefit, it's a caution. I understand what you're saying. I mean, you're taking it off your plane, you're putting it back on. I get it. But sometimes, just play the game, get through the game. You know, when you're out there and you're performing, you know, you're good to go. But when you're sitting there, you know, why not?
Yeah,
Because we're talking, we're doing a lot of other things, you know, I, in my family, I got kids that got both 2 different opinions on everything. We sit there and chaw this thing over all the time, you know, and that's fine. But, and I think that's what it is in the public too. And, but this thing here now, I don't know, the numbers are sure crawling up, you know, it's a lot happening. Makes me nervous, you know, I think, yeah, the fight isn't done. I don't like to lose. And so I would err on, slip the mask on, it ain't gonna break the world. You're in a game,
Yeah.
we're having the game.
So,
And the competition is there, you know,
yeah,
when you get to play, go play the game.
yeah.
you made it.
I don't think you're gonna change anything whether you put the mask on the sideline or not. That's my only point.
Sure.
You can play the game, but you're still gonna have the same outcome with exposures and risk level if we don't say wear the mask.
Well, you
Through
know,
everything.
what you said last week really stuck with me. At the end of the day, the goal here was to get all the kids back in school 5 days a week, you know, whatever hours per day, 5 hours a day. And we've accomplished that,
Yeah,
I think. Now, did.
For more than 5 hours a day.
5 days a week.
I was gonna say,
Full-time, 5
let's
days
correct
a
that,
week.
so people know we're going back
Yeah.
all days. We're
Yeah.
not shortening
Yeah,
the days.
so I totally get it. I mean, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to point out, I think this is personally kind of an inconsistency that's makes us feel better to say it, and maybe there's a
Yeah.
safety factor to it, but it doesn't mitigate the risk level because of, in my opinion, because of the contact to each other.
And that
Maskless.
doesn't mean players can't play with masks. I mean, if
Yeah.
they're worried.
Absolutely, they should if they feel more
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should make that something that they have to do, but I
Mhm.
think anyone should have the option to do it.
mhm,
Agreed.
absolutely.
Okay, anything else? I think we have a motion. Do we have a motion
No,
yet?
we have not.
No? Well, I'll go ahead and make the motion. I move to approve the COVID-19 co-curricular protocols as presented for the start of the 2021-2022 school year.
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 4-1. All right, thank you very much. Moving on, discussion and possible action on building assigned substitute pay.
All right, this was something that was asked to be put on the agenda. I would like to move it to a future agenda when Jeff Mahoney can be here to speak to it. But just to give you a little background information is that last year, of course, subs were paid at a higher rate across almost every school district because it was such a shortage of subs. I mean, in order to keep anything open, a lot of people didn't want to sub, prices went up. So prices have, I hate to use it like that, but the rate of pay is, basically come down a little bit from last year because last year was such an abnormal year. So if we take a look at what we do right now is if you are a day-to-day sub, in other words, someone gets sick, they call, they have you come, and you make basically $130 per day. We are offering our long-term subs, which means you are a person's gonna be gone for a month, and they're not gonna be in their classroom, and we hire you as a long-term sub to come in to basically take over the role of the teacher. In that case, we pay you $200 per day, because you are the teacher. You're creating the lesson plans, you're grading all the assessments, you are taking the place of that teacher, so we pay at a much higher rate.
But that 200 was the standard rate last year.
Right, and what we are, this year we've created what I'll call building subs. In other words, it's a person who's guaranteed that every day they're gonna get paid. Because we are confident from looking at the past that there are, every building is gonna have somebody absent every day. So this dedicated building sub won't be in any one classroom, they'll be in lots of different classrooms depending on where we have the opening. But they'll be guaranteed that they're going to be employed every day. So rather than 130, we're giving them 160. So that's basically a little bit how that was arrived at. I know it was talked about at the PZERC meeting, when all this was discussed. Now, I wasn't at that meeting.
I think, were you and I there? Yeah.
I think ultimately we were all
Yeah,
there.
I think we were all there, but it wasn't, oh, you weren't there. Oh, that's right, okay, sorry. We're all in that same
We all showed
room,
up for
so I keep
co-curricular.
picturing the room going, who was all there? But it was totally different meetings.
Yeah.
And I might have been at that, because it was just before, that might have been my first one.
Yeah,
But anyway, they had discussed that even prior to advance.
but that wasn't, I didn't realize that they were being paid $200.
No, I didn't know
That
that either.
wasn't presented to us. And I'm curious to know, how many days is a typical school year? Like 5 days a week? Is it 16
Typical-
weeks?
Yeah, well,
Thank you, I knew somebody in here would know this, so
What was the answer to
172
that?
days.
that's for this district. It used to be 180 days, it was then changed to hours, or actually minutes. The number of minutes that was then modified, so every school district has to have the same minutes, a
Mhm.
minimum, but they can put them in different, so the number of days is no longer similar for each school district.
So
We have
we're,
172.
so we're asking them to come in and do this for $27,000 is basically what we would be paying them.
Is that the math?
That's the math.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's how I'm thinking about it. Like, the risk isn't changed. In fact, to me, it's almost greater because everyone's there every day, And I just,
That's a good point.
I feel like the long-term sub at 210, and they got paid 200 last year, and we're down to 160. I think we just need to compromise with a little, I would suggest more, but that's just me.
Well, I thought I read it, that the long-term subs, the ones covering for someone's gonna be gone for a long period of time, is actually up to 210.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and last year was 200, but
Right.
the building subs, and I just, I don't know if I want to mention this person's name, but he has been in this school district for 11
quite
years.
some time.
And he is loved. He was there my last 5 years, and he is such a professional. And we had this meeting, where we talked about how important it was, some of our administrators, and we don't want to lose these people. Well, these are the very people who literally are in contact with our children. And it just bothers me that, we're like, well, they're expendable almost. And it's like, is there a way that you could say, look, for someone who's gone 5 years, we're going to pay you at this level, 10 years is going to be this level, 15 is going to be something. Because you don't want to lose a person like this.
Oh,
This
no.
guy is a professional, and he is,
Well,
he
they
is
all,
loved
they
by
all
the
are,
students.
that's why they've been
And I
chosen.
would-
Yeah,
Well-
but you got somebody that really knows the
Yeah,
heartbeat of your district, he knows your kids
He
from
knows
one
the
year to the
teachers.
next. Yeah,
And I want to say all four.
Yeah.
I mean, I know you're pointing
Yeah, I
out one.
understand, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I
that
understand.
they're all being asked to serve in staffing positions, but the reason why we're not hiring them as staffing positions is because some of them are retired and they will lose benefits now.
Right.
So we're hurting them because of that. And I just feel like the pay should be remunerate with what they're doing. Is that the right word? I love that word, but I don't know how to say it.
I know what you're trying to
It
say.
should be,
I would just ask that you would wait until Mr. Mahoney can
Yeah.
present the
Oh, okay.
long-term
No, I think,
on
I
this.
think that's.
Sorry.
Because you're not making it on a person, you're making it
Oh,
on
no.
a position.
yeah, yeah.
When, in the argument, if you went, well, a person did 5-10, from past experience, you are setting yourself up for basically a logistic nightmare to try to keep track of how many years have you subbed, and if I subbed in another district, does that count? So, I would just ask that since Mr. Mahoney was involved in this from the whole discussion, that he have a chance to present from start to finish, and then you can make whatever action you think you deemed appropriate.
I think we
So
can-
we're not discussing or making
don't
action?
have to.
Oops.
No, we don't have to.
I apologize for
No, no,
discussing.
no, that's just fine. We can wait till Jeff gets back. and
Okay, so there's no
revisit this.
action.
I think
Gotcha.
that makes more sense. Is that all right with everyone?
sure.
Anybody else have anything by way of discussion on this before we move on? Okay, Children at Risk Plan. Each year, the Board of Education needs to approve the district's Children at Risk Plan. The plan for the 21-22 school year is basically the same as the plan was for last year. Fortunately, the district has a very small number of students who meet the definition of at risk. A copy of the plan is being provided through Board Book. Lauren, excuse me, will be reviewing the plan and answering any questions about the plan on Monday night. If you approve the presented plan, then we can do a motion. Any discussion? Well, I guess we need a motion first.
I move to approve the school district McFarland's 2021-22 child at risk plan as presented.
I'll second. Discussion?
What's,
Christine?
what's changed from last year?
Really nothing. There are no changes, only slight tweaks to some of the building forms. So in there are all the building referral forms if a student would need to go to the student support team. So there are subtle tweaks in formatting, but on a whole, this is the year we have had the least amount of changes. So nothing procedural has changed in this from last year.
Okay.
I just have a question. What's fuel ed? I didn't
Um,
understand that. For it's high
Fuel
school.
ed is the WEVA curriculum
Oh, okay.
that we have access to in McFarland.
Okay.
What's that called?
Fuel ed.
How did you get that name?
I'm not, it wasn't always fuel ed. I believe it is a K-12
Okay.
curriculum that they picked, and that is what it's
Yeah.
called.
Okay.
Okay,
We didn't
anybody-
name it.
Anybody have anything else? Okay, hearing no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Wayne, you wanna, or do you wanna do the future discussion?
Well, what I'm asking is that, since I'm going on vacation, the way that the board meetings are laid out, I'll be here before I go vacation, and I'll be back for the one, after. But there's one in the middle. I hate being gone for board meetings, all right? I'm not flying back from Athens to be a part of the board meeting.
You don't hate
My
it that
thought
much.
is that if we take the agenda items that normally be for your October 4th, and we divide them up, the ones that we can move up to September, we move in September, the ones that we could move back to the second meeting in October, that we move those, and you cancel the October 4th meeting. It's not like you are depriving yourself of meetings, because this month you'll have 4 in a meeting.
Yeah.
You usually have 2 meetings per month. This month you're gonna have 4 meetings, so.
I hadn't noticed.
So anyway, so what I'm asking is so that I, don't have to miss a board meeting, that we divide the agenda items up, and then you can cancel your October 4th. You don't have to take action on that now, but it's what I'm,
It's a good idea.
at least letting you think about.
That's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you feel really deprived, I can guarantee I can come up with some more meetings for you on those other days.
Well, we
Even-
can always call it if we needed, if we absolutely needed to,
Sure.
even if we
Yep.
canceled, if something
Right.
happened, or we were going to make
Yeah,
some
if you
changes.
really need it, I know that Jeff,
Mhm.
Melissa, and Lauren are more than happy to,
More than able.
yep, they are more than able.
So what time is it in Athens at 7 PM?
About 7, I think it's 7 or 8 hours time difference, so I think right now it's probably about 4 in the morning.
I know it's 6 to.
And I get up early, but, I'm hoping not to get up that early.
And I can make just a quick comment here under the district events. You've got listed the combination McFarland Education Foundation, McFarland Athletic Department fundraiser, which is a golf outing each year. That was held last Saturday out at the Oaks Golf Course. I believe there was in the neighborhood of 120 participants. As you all probably are aware, the weather could not have possibly been any nicer for a golf outdoor, any sort of golf or outdoor fundraising event. I believe it was probably very successful in terms of money raised, and I know it was a big hit with everyone that was there. It's really an uplifting kind of event when you get community members and district people together in that sort of an environment, and it's just wonderful. And it worked out very well, and people, when they leave, I think they feel like they've helped the kids in the school district, and that's what's important. That's where the money goes to scholarships and to whatever Paul feels that he has a need for that is outside of his typical budget. So it's a great event. I think I've been a part of it since the early 80s, I would imagine. We've done one of these in some iteration or another for that long. So it's, the weather has been, I think that event has been rained out twice in close to 40 years. So I don't know what causes the clouds to stay away, but it typically does. But it was a great event, it was fun, well-attended, and a lot of scholarships and goods will be gotten because of it. Okay.
Should I mention about the 2 students?
Okay.
Yeah, there are 2 high school students, I believe they're sophomores, and they're interested in putting together a school board meeting newsletter. And I talked with Sarah Buzalowski, is that her name, I believe? The associate principal at the high school. And I don't know exactly why she chose me. She just said, because I guess you were a teacher here, you might want to talk to them. So I'm asking, I'll be honest with you, before, I would like to talk to the 2 girls and with Sarah as well, and just try to figure out, what are your objectives, what are you trying to do? The Thistle, and particularly now that Dr. Anderson is putting your blog in there, a lot of it's already here, and so I'm not quite sure if the girls are aware of that, but it's kind of a neat idea, and it's really good to encourage kids to get involved with things that
Absolutely.
they're passionate about. And so I will at least talk to them, and I'll try to get back to all of you and kind of tell you.
Please.
They're in the process of kind of figuring out what they want to do with this, so.
And we should be picking up another 2 student council school board reps,
Right,
probably.
once the school year starts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's add that as an agenda item because we need to look at that policy to see whether that's the appropriate way that we're gonna get representation
Yeah, I
from the
don't think
school.
we ever have.
Yes, I would, Dr. Fribino, I strongly agree with that. It's
Yeah.
just, let's.
I agree.
look at what we've
Well, the
done.
policy, I don't know if we.
You made some changes, because I have a copy of the policy and
Yeah.
the changes that were made, so
Yeah.
you must make policy changes like. at the
I don't
end
think
of-
we did for that,
There was a holdover.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we need to revisit that policy and then move on it. if
I know
we can.
Jeff Finstead was looking at one at your behest.
Yeah, that was the one that.
Wasn't that the
I had
one with
that
the
had-
student
It had certain
representation?
changes in that on
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
maybe didn't act on
Yep, we didn't act on
it.
it.
Okay,
Add that to the agenda.
Yep. Your adjournment.
all right. I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll, go ahead.
I will second.
Kate,
I'll-
Bruce, second?
Wait,
Oh.
who's first?
Oh, I
Sorry.
thought,
I'll make a motion.
And I'll
Thank
second.
you. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 9.